This is Kristen Bell.
And Adam Brody.
And we're dating.
In our new show, Nobody Wants This.
Right. We're not really dating.
No, in real life, we're married.
Right. Married to other people, not each other.
Oh, this is complicated.
Right. It's just like our love lives in Nobody Wants This, a show about what happens when a bold and sometimes provocative podcast host finds her unlikely match in a sweet traditional rabbi.
You can watch every episode of Nobody Wants This now, only on Netflix.
When I get the questions from people that say, my child is freaking out in the morning before school, or I have to take him to get a cavity filled and he's totally freaking out. What do I do? What do? You tolerate it as a parent. You maybe talk about some problem solving, but stay out of the realm of emergency. It is predictable, it is redundant, and it is persistent.
Welcome to Season 7 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we'll talk about managing anxiety and all the other emotions too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious. I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author. I've been a therapist for 35 years. Parenting can be a flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll tell you what to do and what to say.
Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Robin.
I was thinking today we could go over kind of a meta-level episode based on the questions that we get from both listeners of a long time and our newer listeners, sort of how to make this podcast the most useful to them and their families.
Yes. And this happens to me in virtually every context that I'm in. So it might happen to me when I'm doing a training at a school. It might happen to me when I'm working with clients. It's certainly questions on the Facebook group and all that kind of stuff. We want to do a meta episode on kind of the meta approach to managing your kids' worries.
There's a joke you have shared. You will spend a talk talking about how to fix and ride a blue bicycle, and you'll go over it in detail for an hour. And then at the end of the talk, someone raises their hand and says, yeah, but I have a red bicycle.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. It was interesting. I was giving a webinar. Somebody posted a question in the chat very similar to that. Well, I have a situation with blah, blah, blah. And somebody who has clearly been to my trainings or has listened to the podcast before put in the chat, now would be a good time for you to talk about the red bicycle and the blue bicycle, Lynn. And that's the analogy that comes up all the time. We get caught up in the content. We get caught up in the details. We get caught up in the particulars. And what's really, really helpful when you're trying to help yourself, when you're trying to help your kids, if you're a clinician listening to this, you're trying to help your clients, is how do we step back from the content? And I know that I say this all the time, but it is absolutely the trickiest concept for people to get a hold of, based on the fact that I get content-based questions all the time.
Yeah, because I just think about my own learning curve doing this podcast with you. Where I am now of understanding this stuff before we started is huge. But the one thing that I love that you always say is that anxiety is really predictable. It's really simple. It's not that complicated. However, if you're a parent, I know you deal with school administrators and guidance counselors and teachers, and nurses, but if you're a parent, it's very tough to have anything be, emotionally charged and upsetting with your kids. So it's easy to step into that place. But the first thing to do when you recognize there is an issue is get your own feelings out of the equation so that you could put yourself into this position where you're starting to think the way you're about to explain to us. Anxiety is very simple. It's actually going on in every family kind of all the time. Don't freak out yourself. And then start looking at it in a pretty objective way.
Yeah. And I would add to that. So I have these 3 words that I say, that anxiety is predictable, it is redundant, and it is persistent. We know when it's going to show up. It says the same thing over and over again, and it sticks around. It's not just one trial learning. If we can begin to understand, and if we cannot react to it, if we cannot promote it to an emergency, if we cannot freak out because the content is something unfamiliar or different, then we can begin to see, oh, this thing, here it is again. It does the same thing. It has the same message. And then we don't get as freaked out. Because remember, anxiety's job is to promote things to an emergency that aren't an emergency.
Right. And if your kid is freaking out and that makes you feel like you're in an emergency too, then you're just in a circle.
Yeah.
So that's why this is meta. You have to observe on a more objective way what's going on with your kid after you've been able to learn how to step outside it and not treat the situation as an emergency either, because then you're thinking about it from a place of your own anxiety.
Right. And let me just tell you that the thing that really is disheartening for me, the thing that really truly makes me sad or frustrated, or I feel like I'm screaming into the void, when I talk about the patterns of worry and how do we manage them and how can we learn about managing worry, and I say it over and over again, it's not anybody's fault. It's just a hard thing for people to understand, is that people still get freaked out. Schools still get freaked out. Other clinicians still get freaked out when they're confronted with some content, when they're confronted with a situation or a reaction that's really big or unfamiliar. It's the same stuff. We did that sex episode recently, and this was the theme. Like, people get freaked out. Oh my God, she's freaking out about sex or death. It would be so much easier if she were freaking out about snakes or
Thunderstorms.
thunder. Right. We really have to work very, very hard to recognize that anxiety, worry, they grab onto stuff, and what they grab onto is not all that important. What we really want to pay attention to is, what is the skill that your child needs? Like, here's the problem in front of us. Is the problem thunderstorms, or is the problem your child's ability to promote things to an emergency that aren't an emergency? Your child is freaked out about getting a shot. Is the problem the needle, or is the problem the family's inability to tolerate distress or uncertainty? Your child is freaking out about going to a new school. Is the problem with the school? Is the problem starting a new grade? Is the problem an inability to step into situations in which you're gonna feel some discomfort or you're gonna have some things that you can't handle? It all comes down to the ability to tolerate not knowing and being able to step into things, feel uncomfortable, and then do some problem solving. And if we don't give kids practice with that, if we don't model that, then all the different content, that's when it becomes whack-a-mole. You're just trying to solve each individual problem. You're trying to learn how to ride the red bike, then the blue bike, then the green bike. And really, we have to step back and look at the bigger problem that we want to solve, or the bigger issue, the bigger skill that anxious families need. That's the meta. Yeah.
Let's talk about, after the break, how to really differentiate between content versus process. And I would say, having read your book, The Anxiety Audit, I know you have always used the word process, but I love the word pattern.
Yeah, same word.
I mean, I know you mean it the same thing, but I love content versus pattern. So we'll be right back.
All right. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. How cool is that? It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. On the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs. It gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management.
All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fat or mostly carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements.
You can also breathe into it before or after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time.
Your metabolism is your body's engine, and it's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy, better sleep.
The list goes on. It helps with tracking your cycles, the onset of menopause. You can adjust your recommendations to keep your body healthy. You can keep your energy up, and you can stave off those cravings.
So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/fluster to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/fluster for 15% off your purchase.
Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Can we talk about JLo for a moment? There's just no one like her, and her skin, I mean, come on. She's been in the spotlight for nearly 30 years, and she just looks incredible. Who else looks like her after 3 decades in the spotlight? She clearly has the best skin habits, and I'd say she actually invented that glow, ageless face. Get that JLo glow for yourself now with JLo's Beauty Deluxe Kit, the one-and-done skincare solution clinically proven to tighten and lift for instant, long-lasting results. JLo believes ageless beauty has no expiration date. It's what's motivated her to create a luxurious but accessible skincare line that you can afford to use every day with products that follow you through life at any stage. The secret is JLo Beauty's easy 5-step routine, perfect for glowing skin. JLo doesn't stop and believes your skincare should work as hard as you do. So she harnessed powerhouse ingredients in transformational combinations and concentrations that work in one easy to flow morning night solution. Cleanse, treat, moisturize, protect. That JLo Deluxe Kit does it all. And this 5-piece set removes impurities, makeup, pollution, and SPF. It gives your skin a smoother, visible, brighter look, and it improves the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles. And it protects against UVAs and UVBs. So my skincare routine is centered around that Blockbuster Hydrating Cream. My skin is so much more plump and dewy, and I see why 100% of the people from an 8-week clinical study who tried it had smoother skin as a result. So try JLo Beauty for 60 days, and if you're not completely satisfied, just return the bottles, even if empty, and get your money back. Want that JLo glow? Head to jlobeauty.com/Flusterclux and get a special gift of 4 free masks for listeners of Flusterclux. Head to jlobeauty.com/Flusterclux for 4 free masks and free shipping today. jlobeauty.com/Flusterclux.
Hey, have you heard of HelloFresh? It's a meal subscription service where you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients, seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. Skip trips to the grocery store. Count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. It's why it's America's #1 meal kit.
HelloFresh delivers all those pre-portioned ingredients you need to make an easy homemade meal. All the proteins, veggies, sauces, spices, and more arrive in your box, along with simple instructions that walk you through each step in the cooking process. They have great pictures, and even kids can follow them and cook dinner.
You might like the fit and wholesome, or quick and easy, or vegetarian. You'll always find something that works for you and that your family will love from HelloFresh.
We've been HelloFresh customers, I think, for 8 months now.
Wow.
It works perfectly for us. It has turned my whole family into chefs for dinner so that it's not all on me. Thank you, HelloFresh.
Get 10 free meals at hellofresh.com/free Flusterclux. Applied across 7 boxes, new subscribers only, varies by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals just by going to hellofresh.com/free Flusterclux.
It's America's #1 meal kit for a reason.
Okay, we're back.
So, Lynn, my aha moment for myself was really understanding there are patterns that we have that we show up for. You unpack 7 of them in your book. So tell us the 7 patterns.
Okay, so the patterns are going catastrophic thinking, global thinking, when you go big, and those two, catastrophic and global, like to hang out together. Inner isolation, so we know, and disconnection, so we know that anxiety pulls you in rather than have you connect out. The lure of busyness, of just creating chaos, of taking on too many things and getting caught up in all of that stuff. And that's related to overwhelm. And then we have irritability, which is really a symptom of those other things. And then I also talk about in the anxiety audit about the difference between self-care and self-medication, which is really, when we talk about self-care and medication, we're really talking about that elimination strategy, that elimination pattern of trying to get rid of the way I feel by doing things that will get rid of my feelings, get rid of the situation, get rid of the conflict.
Right, with addictions and vices.
Sure. Yep.
So those are the patterns. And I think that that's what I kind of do now is, some of those patterns are far more common in kids, and adults can do the whole buffet. What is the pattern going on versus what is the stuff that's inciting the pattern? I love this example from your practice is that there was a daughter who was really freaked out about her security, like she was going to get kidnapped overnight. So she had this content that she thought that someone was going to come in and rob their house and kidnap her.
Yeah, which is not an unusual fear for kids to have,
Sure.
by the way.
Sure. So that was the content. And she got very big feelings about this. But the parents addressed the content by investing in a fierce guard dog.
First, they put in a $50,000 alarm system in their house. Ouch. And then the daughter watched like a Mission Impossible movie or something, or Ocean's 11, I don't know what, in which they were figuring out how to circumvent an alarm system. So she watches this movie and she's like, well, clearly these alarm systems are not foolproof. So then they got a great big dog. And the dog was supposed to bark at intruders. The little girl wanted the dog to sleep in her bedroom because that would be another level of protection. But this big, huge dog didn't really want to sleep in the bedroom with the girl. All of these things that this family was trying to do. Now, that's an extreme example, but there's example after example after example of when something happens that makes somebody feel scared or uncertain, or they don't feel like they can handle it. And then the family goes to great lengths to take away the fear, to take away the worry, to take away the discomfort, to take away the uncertainty.
Right. And instead of addressing her pattern of really escalating worry, they were focusing on solutions of the content that was triggering it. You mentioned like getting a shot earlier. So like, let's take 2 8-year-old kids and one of them is going to get a shot. Ugh, I hate shots. And then they go in and they get their shot and then that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a kid who's like, oh, am I getting a shot today?
Mm-hmm.
And then
or am I getting a shot this year?
Could be really big.
Yeah. So that child begins to tell the story about, in their head, tell the story about getting a shot, and they imagine it in the idea of a needle, and it grosses them out and it freaks them out. And so their brain moves into the emergency state. And so now they have created a story. They have created an emergency about getting a shot. A shot, and fill in the blank, right? That's just the content. It could be a shot. It could be trying a new food. It could be getting on an airplane.
Going to a new school, going to summer camp.
Going to a new school. It could be wearing shoes. It could be getting glasses. I mean, fill in the blank. And what happens is the story turns into an emergency. And the reactions get big and powerful, and I can't do it. And the child is acting as if, because their body and their brain are responding, acting as if they are in an emergency.
Here's the question that the listeners need to ask themselves, and we are testing you right now. You have those 2 different kids. What skill does the first kid have that the second kid doesn't?
You want me to answer it?
Let's give everyone just a second, and I'll play the Jeopardy theme. What is the skill?
So the skill that the first child has, or the ability that the first child has, is to not create an emergency. So what they do is they say, oh, it's going to be uncomfortable. I don't really like getting shots. Maybe they've never had a shot before. Like I have a little girl that I see just had a tooth pulled for the first time. So she had never had a tooth pulled. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but they have a sense inside that they can step into a situation and manage the discomfort, manage the uncertainty, manage not knowing exactly how it's going to go. And they also tend to trust that the adults around them sort of know what they're doing. So they feel like they've got some security of adults saying, people get shots. The adults normalize it. They don't make a big deal about it.
And then another one that you always say is that their anxiety in their own heads, because everyone still has anxiety, but their anxiety isn't screaming in their own ear, you can't handle it. You can't handle it.
Right. They don't trigger off this big, huge amygdala response because their language, the story that they're telling themselves, what they're imagining. I mean, I always say, I've never met a worrier who doesn't have a really big imagination because they go there. They have to imagine it. And so the child who walks in and says, oh, I'm going to get a shot. Oh, I don't like shots, but I'll get a shot, is able to go through a situation without creating this emergency. Because remember, anxiety is not about real emergencies. Somebody said to me recently that fear, they had an acronym for fear, and it was false evidence of an accurate response or something like that. I had not heard the acronym. And I said, no, I disagree with that. A fear response is that there is something coming at us and we have a fear response because that protects us. Anxiety is the hijacking of the fear response in a situation that's not an emergency. So the child who's going to get a shot, who's not freaking out, is not creating an emergency. The child who is freaking out is telling a story, activating the part of their brain, responding as if it's an emergency, even before it happens, oftentimes long before it happens. And so they're creating this response in their bodies and their brains. They're telling this story. They're making it bigger. Do we love shots? No. Should we love shots? No, that would also be weird. But what the difference is between those two kids is one child is able to say, I don't like it, but I can handle it. And the other child is saying, this is an emergency and it is a necessity. It is a requirement. It is and sometimes it becomes a habit that I absolutely freak out and that this is an emergency. And then what happens is parents respond to the emergency as if it is an emergency and as if they have to do something in order to take care of the emergency, where what they really need to do is to take care of the overreaction, to take care of the anxiety that created the emergency, because there's not an emergency. That's the thing you have to remember.
Okay, I have 2 more kids to play this little testing game.
Okay.
It is after school, after a big play rehearsal. 2 kids are left for pickup. They're 13 years old, and one of the kids acknowledges that the parent's running late. So they pull out their homework and start working on their homework.
Mm-hmm.
The other kid is like, oh my gosh, where is my mom? Pulls out the phone, pulls out the Life 360 app or the tracking app, starts looking at the location of the parent to make sure that that parent is en route and whatever, even though they knew the mom remembered that there was a later practice to pick up. And the child's getting really, really uncomfortable and starting to feel all of the anxiety responses in their body. Let's talk about those 2 different kids.
Okay. The pattern you're talking about right there is the pattern of catastrophic thinking. One child, the mom is late, and maybe even the kid says like, well, I knew she had to go and pick up my brother at basketball, or my mom's always...
There's late mom again. That was me. My mom was often late. I'm like, she's not on time today.
Right. There's late mom again. So that child says, okay, so here's an inconvenience. And I'm not going to jump to the worst case scenario, which is why we don't say, everybody remember, we don't say, what's the worst that could happen? We don't do that. That's an invitation for catastrophic thinking. The first child says, all right, well, I am assuming that she's late and I can do something and I can wait a little bit. Now, maybe if it went on for 20 minutes or a half an hour, they would begin to think, okay, now there's a problem I have to solve. But while their parent is a few minutes late, they're like, yeah, this is okay. I can handle this. This is not an emergency. The other child, as soon as the parent is not on time, as soon as the parent is not there, starts to tell the story, starts to freak out, starts to say, I can't handle this. This is an emergency. And remember that our anxiety wants certainty and comfort. So they begin to go on a quest of trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen. And if they can't figure out exactly what's happening in that moment, then the story gets worse and the symptoms get worse and the amygdala gets more activated. They start telling themselves a story with a catastrophic ending. They start what-ifing. What if my mom forgot? What if my mom doesn't come to pick me up? What if my mom fill in the blank?
Was in a car wreck.
What if my mom is dead? What if my mom, right? It just escalates very quickly. Now, what's interesting about those 2 stories is that chances are that one of the parents is also catastrophic.
Well, the other reason why I gave you those two examples to unpack is that you just said it. Anxiety needs certainty and comfort. So the triggers of anxiety, the reverse, they're going to make you uncomfortable because you're going to get a needle in your arm or your butt, or you just don't know. And like technology gives us such certainty. So when we don't know something, that makes people very uncomfortable.
Right. Very uncomfortable.
So looking for the comfort and certainty is such a helpful shortcut to really understanding why the anxiety is being triggered.
That's right. And the problem currently, in my opinion, is that there is an expectation of certainty.
Oh my gosh, we talk about this all the time.
Right? There's an expectation of certainty. Mm-hmm.
The certainty piece, I think, is where we've gone wrong as a parenting generation, because technology has given us such certainty. Adults and children alike have very weak uncertainty muscles. Their muscles to tolerate uncertainty are just gone. We can track our kids now. We always know where they are.
Right now, like your daughter is away at college and she can contact you on a regular basis. You're exactly correct when we talk about the ability to tolerate not knowing, the ability to tolerate uncertainty. Somebody was just writing about this in the Facebook group. They said they had a victory where their child got put on the wrong school bus. And this little guy had to figure out, and of course the school was like, oh, you're on the wrong bus, and they were getting him home and rerouting him. But the mom didn't know exactly where the child was for a while. But then the kid got home. He was kind of okay with it. The same thing happened to one of my clients a long time ago. I'm sure I've talked about that. They dropped him off at the wrong stop. And he walked home like a mile, and he got home and he was like, wow, my stop this year is really far from the house, Mommy. And meanwhile, he had gotten dropped off in the wrong place. If we were to really narrow it down, if we were really to just sort of talk about the core of this, if you don't have the ability to tolerate any uncertainty, if you don't have the ability to not know exactly what's going to happen, that is a setup for anxiety, because that's what gets translated into an emergency. That I don't know exactly what's going to happen, so this must be an emergency. And that's just not true. But that's the difference between those two kids in each of those scenarios that you pointed out. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it could feel uncomfortable, or there's some uncertainty here. So that gets put into the category of this is an emergency.
I start thinking of it through this lens very much now, but that doesn't mean that those things don't come up. Like I had to have a very uncomfortable conversation with one kid recently, and I also had to tolerate uncertainty about another kid in London recently. As a parent, these are going to show up for you too.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're ever going to not show up. You deal with this all the time as a parent too.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it is that tolerating uncertainty doesn't feel great. So when I say the skill of tolerating uncertainty, I'm not saying tolerate uncertainty and love it.
Right. So that's what I was thinking is like, let's talk about if you had that skill of tolerating uncertainty, what does that look like?
That looks like waiting. It looks like differentiating between when do I need to take action and when do I not need to take action. It looks like the difference between maybe this is a problem that I need to address. One of the things probably, if we were to look at tolerating uncertainty, it actually comes down to being capable of waiting a little bit, or being capable of not jumping to the worst case scenario and going through it in a stepwise fashion. Say your child has a fever and you tend to be catastrophic, and you take your child's temperature and it's 101. And you're like, okay, my child has a fever and these are the things that we do for a fever, and stay home from school today and let's just keep an eye on things. And you have certain steps that you take because it's not unusual for a child to have a fever. So you're tolerating not knowing exactly where this is going or not knowing exactly what's wrong. But a catastrophic response is you take your child's temperature, there's 101 fever, you immediately take them to the emergency room, or you call the pediatrician's office, or you show up to urgent care, or even you just internally start freaking out and imagining horrible things that are happening. That's a catastrophic response. You have to be able to allow yourself to feel uncertain. Let's just take it out of the realm of a medical issue. Let's just say that your child comes home and is having a conflict with another kid in class and they had an argument, or your child says, I went to go sit with my friends at the lunch table and they told me I'm not allowed to sit there anymore. Now, that catastrophic emergent response is, as I say, there are parents that are just coming in hot. You're going to call the school. You're going to get very agitated or upset with your child. You're going to think you're going to call the parents of the other kids and say, what's going on? I heard that this happened. Versus tolerating not knowing exactly what's going to happen and maybe doing some problem solving and seeing if they can have the opportunity to work through it.
And also that kid who comes home with that problem the very next day might be a completely normal day. So we've overreacted for something that was just like a little blip. I love the expression like sitting on your hands, like not doing something and just waiting is an absolutely great choice sometimes.
Yeah. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And anxious parents are not so good at doing that. I get it. And also it is just torturous to put yourself through this imagining of the worst case scenario rather than training yourself to say, let me see how this plays out. That is a skill. So we've got the patience, we've got waiting a little bit. Maybe we're asking some questions. We're modeling that something is difficult, but also within the realm of normal. And we're talking to ourselves about not going catastrophic. This is not an emergency. That's a huge skill. Tolerating uncertainty means that you're going to tolerate uncertainty. It's not an emergency. Are things sometimes an emergency? Say you've got a kid who's got 101 fever and it goes up to 104 and then they start complaining of pain in their side. And then you're like, okay, now I need to take it the next step. But we don't have to treat it as if it's an emergency before it's an emergency. And also, just to be honest, a lot of times we treat things that are an emergency that are not even going to turn into an emergency. So if your child gets stung by a bee, if your child's not allergic to bees, getting stung by a bee is not an emergency. But if you've got a child who's afraid of bees, you treat the possibility of them getting stung as if it's an emergency. And your child's not allergic to bees. Will it be uncomfortable? Will it hurt? Yeah, I got stung by a hornet a few years ago hiking. It really, really hurt, but it's not an emergency. That's the skill. And when I get the questions from people that say, my child is freaking out in the morning before school, or I have to take him to get a cavity filled and he's totally freaking out, or they had an argument with a classmate and now they won't get on the school bus and they're freaking out. What do I do? That's where it's red bike, blue bike. What do? You tolerate it as a parent. You maybe talk about some problem solving, but stay out of the realm of emergency. It is predictable, it is redundant, and it is persistent.
The vanilla ice cream expression you always use too. You also say fake it till you make it. If I were your client and I was in there with my kid and we talked about a situation, you're focusing on not only the kid's response, but my response too. And so that's why a family needs to see it, because it's hard to know if you're not thinking about this and you're new to this information from you. It's hard to see your own anxiety clouding this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had several very satisfying, even delightful experiences. I just had one recently. I had probably, if I think about it, I probably had 3 recently where I'm working with a family. So remember, I don't see kids alone. So the parents are coming in with their kids. There was some situation because it's the beginning of the school year. So there's a lot of uncertainty and situations coming up with teachers and classmates and buses and blah, blah, blah. And there were several situations where the parent got totally freaked out about something and the kid comes in and is like, wait till you hear about this. I was handling it fine and she turned into a crazy person. the child has learned how to manage the uncertainty and is really good at recognizing the parent's modeling of the catastrophic behavior. Turns out we have a good laugh about it and the parents understand it and they're owning it. But it's just a very good example of kids learning how to respond differently to this catastrophic parent. And then the parent gets the hang of it, of course.
But I love that because another phrase we've said on the podcast, anxiety is a family problem, but it's also a family solution. And if we're encouraging our kids to understand this, to be able to label it, to be able to talk about it, they in turn are showing us our own patterns and guiding us in our own path of owning this stuff. This is like the optimal scenario, is that the whole family is aware of when other members of the family's buttons get triggered and call them out on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're freaking out. This is why I tell parents all the time, you got to pull out your worry part and give it a name too, because then your kids can say, oh my God, Ethel is really going nutty here, Mom.
Because sometimes it's easier to figure out someone else's stuff than it is your own. So it's easier for the kid to recognize the anxiety in their parent before they recognize it in themselves.
Yeah.
That's why everyone needs the same information.
Yeah. I had a funny example of that recently. So as I have said many times, my husband doesn't carry a cell phone, doesn't have a cell phone. People are like, oh my God, that's great. I'm like, yeah, you'd be married to somebody without a cell phone. It has its inconveniences for sure. So he will go off hiking and he loves to go off the trail. He loves to go into the woods. I don't know where he is. It's like 1974. And there have been times where he has either gotten lost or taken a longer route than he thought. One time he got food poisoning when he was hiking. And so he was really, really late.
The chili. I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, God. Somebody picked him up, like he was walking back to the car on the side of the road and somebody picked him up, but he was really, really late. So this has happened multiple times. And so I don't get that worried. Like in terms of patience, I'm like, this has happened. But then if it gets to be around like 11 o'clock, I'll start to get worried. But I have a pretty high tolerance for him showing up late from hikes. A few weeks ago, I went on a walk around here, like in my town. And I have these big loops that I do because I love to walk. I was walking and I miscalculated when it was going to start to get dark because I was still on my summer time zone. And also there was a big thunderstorm that happened. And so it was pouring rain. So I was close to home. I was probably a mile away from home and it was really dark. And then it started thundering and downpouring. And it took me, 15 minutes to walk that mile in the dark rain. I got home and guess who was freaking out? He was like, where were you? You were gone for so long and it was dark and it was raining. And I was beginning to wonder, like, what happened to you? Did you? The funny part is I had my cell phone. He just could have, we do have a landline. He could have just called me and been like, hey, are you okay? He didn't even think to do that.
Yeah, he's not wired to find certainty in a device.
Yeah.
Like the rest of us.
Yeah, but it was such an interesting flip-flop. I guess he hasn't really been challenged very often with me not showing up. He was really worried when I came in the door. And I said to him, hey, so
karma.
Yeah, how's that feel, fella?
Well, we come back. Let's do a wrap up.
Okay.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. As your kids get older, some things about parenting get easier. Like they'll get dressed in the morning for school by themselves, but others don't, like having that conversation about money. And the fact is, kids won't really know how to manage their money until they're actually in charge of it. And that's where Greenlight can help.
Greenlight is a debit card and a money app for families. Parents can send money to their kids, keep an eye on kids' spending and saving. Kids and teens build money confidence and lifelong financial literacy skills.
With the Greenlight app, kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely, thanks to games that teach money skills in a fun, accessible way.
The Greenlight app also includes a chores feature where you can set up one-time or recurring chores. You can customize it to your family's needs.
I love it. Makes it really easy to pay them for the projects that I give them because let's face it, we're busy and sometimes we forget and then they don't want to do the chores the next time.
Yeah, and I think that helping kids understand that you can earn money, that you can do things responsibly, and save money. I think one of the great things that we can do with our money, financial literacy with kids is teach kids that saving money in order to spend it on something worthwhile is a great practice to have. And this app helps parents and kids do that together.
Millions of parents and kids are learning about money on Greenlight, and it's the easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and families to navigate this financial life together.
So sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/fluster. That's greenlight.com/fluster to try Greenlight for free.
Greenlight.com/fluster.
Being an adult definitely has its advantages, right? I mean, you can stay up late. You don't need a bedtime, but there's also things you have to do as an adult that aren't so much fun, like finishing your taxes and, making doctor's appointments. That is one of the things that makes adult life not all that interesting. However, ZocDoc is a free app and a website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care to skin care, and much more. You can filter for doctors who take your insurance, the ones that are located nearby. They're highly rated by verified patients. You can see their actual appointment openings. You can choose a time that works for you. Now, doesn't that make being an adult just a little bit easier? Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and you can even score same-day appointments. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/fluster to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/fluster. ZocDoc.com/fluster.
You know, Lynn, I love fall, Halloween and leaf peeping, but the fall is actually your and my busiest travel season.
It is.
And can I tell you why I'm so obsessed with Liquid IV?
Go ahead.
Okay, it was actually you and your passion for Liquid IV. And I cannot tell you how much I love having a cold bottle of water with Liquid IV on my flights. Now it is my ritual.
Yeah, I have a hard time just pounding water. So even when I'm on a plane and they come by and say, "What can I get you to drink?" I'm like, "Oh, I know I should drink water." But if I've got Liquid IV, I'm really going to drink it. I keep a container of it in my refrigerator all the time. I do a ton of hiking, and having that there to drink and rehydrate has been so easy for me to do something that I know is so good for me.
Well, their new hydration multiplier and immune support comes in mango passion fruit, which is my favorite flavor. And with 5 times the daily value of vitamin C and 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, you give your body and the immune system the support it needs while you are feeling like you're on your way to the tropics.
And Liquid IV is always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. So tear, pour, live more. 1 stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Support everyday wellness with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code FLUSTER at checkout.
That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code FLUSTER at liquidiv.com.
Okay, so now back to the show.
So, Lynn, I feel like this conversation has helped zone in on patterns and skills that I hope has been helpful. And I thought it might also be helpful when you talk about the patterns, the ways kids and teens let those patterns manifest, because some of them are more common. Because inner isolation would be a very common one for teens.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Irritability also. Talk a little bit about when discomfort or uncertainty is triggering an anxiety response in your kid or teen. How could that look?
With kids and teens, for one, it really shows up with physical symptoms for sure. So that's another way that people sort of get pulled off into the content. So really understanding that when somebody's anxious, it is very likely, very common, very normal for them to have stomach symptoms or headaches. Little kids a lot say, I'm tired. They often say they're bored when they're anxious, which is an interesting response. There's what we call vague somatic complaints. So they don't feel good. They'll say they're sick. So we'll see that when somebody is feeling uncertain, when somebody's worrying about something, we see that a lot with kids and with adults too, but we see it a lot with kids. With teens, they will go inside. And so there's a lot going on inside of them. They're having conversations with themselves. They're dealing with it. They might be being very critical of themselves, and they're not very communicative. So you see them sort of retreating, shutting themselves in their room. This is why the connection between anxiety and depression in teens is so common. So we see them going inside and telling the story. And then they've also got social media to help them tell a lot of stories, but that's a whole nother topic. There's two sort of opposite reactions, but they're from the same place. So they might go inside, they might shut down, but they also might get angry, irritable. They don't want to talk about it. Lots of times when you're a teenager or you're a child and you don't want to talk about it, it's almost like somebody is trying to talk to you about the content and they're interrupting your internal story. It's sort of like they're saying like, hey, I don't want to talk about this right now. My anxiety and I are having a meeting in here. We're working on this. We're creating an emergency and you're getting in the way. So you see a lot of that irritability, a lot of that pushback. And then we also see kids really wanting, this is for younger kids mostly, kids really wanting parents to step in and take the uncertainty away by fixing the problem, by doing something to make it go away. So we can see a combination of that, which can really look like sort of an emotional jambalaya. So I'm inside, I'm retreating, I'm pushing you back. I'm also seeking certainty from you. I'm being mad at you that you're not solving the problem. There's a lot of big emotions that you want to pay attention to. But the commonality of all of that is that they're trying to get rid of the uncertainty. They're trying to find a way to feel comfortable and certain. And they're going to do a lot of things to get there. And mainly we're going to see they're going to want to avoid, or they're going to want you to fix the problem and create the certainty.
That's great.
That's what we're going to see.
There are a couple podcast episodes that I want to shout out. We have a playlist on our Spotify profile that says Start Here. And what you'll find in that is Lynn goes through her 7-step process that's actually kind of the focus of your first book, Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents. The puzzle pieces of managing anxiety step by step. And then another series that we both think is very important is that there are 3 skills that are kind of the paramount of learning to tolerate uncertainty and discomfort. And those skills we sort of talk about and unpack, which are flexibility, autonomy, and problem solving. Those episodes, I think when you listen to those or listen to them again, because honestly, I feel I'm a front row student of yours, Lynn, but you got to hear this stuff a lot and then you'll have the great aha moment.
Mm-hmm. Don't feel like, oh, I'm not getting this, or I listened to it and I still don't understand it. I work with clinicians all the time. This is really helpful if we just accept that it needs to be repeated.
Practiced and repeated.
It needs to be practiced and repeated. And let me just finish. So for people who are like, oh my gosh, that was a lot of stuff. And where do I start and what do I do? Start with those episodes that Robin was just talking about. But here's the sequence of things I want you to think about. Your child is having a problem. Your child is going to emergency. It's not an emergency. So you can recognize it's an anxious response. So you figure out what's going on. You're going to get out of the content. You're going to look at the pattern, pull away from the details, and even think, okay, so what's the skill that my child needs right now? What do they need to hear from me? Let me talk about how worry is getting them, not about the content, but what's the pattern? Is my child being catastrophic? Is my child going global? Am I overreacting? Have we stepped into the emergency? And then what are the skills we're going to teach? The ability to tolerate not knowing. This is where that language of it's okay that we don't know this, but we're going to step in anyway. And then the final piece, the critical piece, is that you've got to let your child do the things that make them feel uncertain and uncomfortable. You learn through practice. This is experiential learning. So those 3 X's I talk about all the time. We're going to expect worry to show up. We're going to externalize it. We're going to pull it out. We're going to give it a name. We're going to recognize the worry pattern. And then we're going to experiment by stepping in and doing. This is as simple as I can make it. And I know that it's easy to get caught up in the weeds. It's easy to get pulled into all of the big, powerful emotions. And as parents, you get afraid of what's going on with your kid. Keep it simple. This thing is not complicated. Powerful, but not complicated. Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.